welcome to Life, Loss and Hope. Thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. Please continue to like, subscribe and to share. Today I'm talking about a question that is often asked of me. Is talking to my dead loved one normal? Many of you responded to the photograph that I posted on my Facebook page recently with the text that said, "I'm missing talking to you." And you commented how much this resonated with you in grief. Speech is such an integral part of our lives and our relationships. It's hard to contemplate our lives without being able to talk to each other. And yet, this is the harsh reality that happens when someone we love dies. We can no longer talk to them. The gravity and far-reaching effects of how this does affect us in grief, and perhaps in illness when someone's speech is lost due to a stroke, a tumour or an acquired brain injury, is rarely acknowledged or validated. Missing talking to a loved one is a major aspect of grief that seems to underpin the loneliness, isolation, frustration and that feeling of being lost that people describe. There's no one to make decisions with, discuss the day's events with, talk about family, finances, work issues, and virtually every other part of your daily life. Of course, there will be other people that you can still talk to, but generally it's not the person that you most communicated with and now still want to talk to most. That person who would often phone you through the day just to chat or catch up or say "I love you." After a loved one dies, the physical void of their presence is massive, and their voice and how you talked together and did life together, we do miss talking to them. From a young age, I have always loved speech and language and words, probably because my mother read us Tolkien's Hobbit and the trilogy of the Lord of the Rings as children. A writing so rich in imagery and descriptive language that it fueled my imagination for the rest of my life. My early school reports always said she talks too much, or she'd do better if she wasn't such a chatterbox. Later, unsurprisingly, this was reflected in my choice of career. As a speech and language therapist, I worked for 33 years helping others to develop communication and language skills, and later specialising in neurology, working in rehabilitation of speech after brain injury. So the importance of being able to speak has always been a subject that is really close to my heart. In copious studies and experiments, despite extensive training with animals such as parrots, chimpanzees, dolphins, to try and teach them to use language and words as we know it, there has been limited success. So it seems that speech is a unique human gift and the building block of our relationships, our community and our work. It is the key to be able to express our basic needs, our emotions, to ask questions, to give information, to form strong bonds and connections and intimacy in relationships, and so much more. Our well-being and mental health is enhanced by being able to talk through problems, emotions, all the things with somebody. It does help enormously to be fully heard, which is why it's so important in grief to hold space and listen to others as they share their story of pain, by listening without judgment, comparison, or trying to fix it for them. Just externalizing verbally what's going on inside us can be the release that we need. Bereaved people often tell me that they really struggle in this area, missing talking, missing conversation, missing the sound of their loved one's voice. And people can often dread going home in an evening, going home to an empty house, as it can be so silent, and that silence highlights the absence. After my mother died, my father used to leave the radio or keep the TV on to combat that silence that used to hit him when he came back from work. And that really did help him. Often people share with me that they still talk to their loved ones, Perhaps they go to the graveside. They tell them what's been happening. Or they just chat with them as they used to, in their heads or out aloud as they go about their daily life. They ask me, is this normal? Is it okay? Am I going crazy? Am I in denial, or am I wrong to do this? It seems to lead to shame, like it's some sort of guilty secret, which is why it's so hard for someone to tell you this if they are talking to their dead loved one. It is nothing to be ashamed of, and in my opinion is a very normal part of missing a loved one. How could it be that the most fundamental part of your relationship is erased or disappears overnight? Research has shown that it's far better for your mental health to talk in this way to the person that you're missing, as it's a valid and healthy way to cope with loss, and it gives you time and space to be present in the relationship still and in your bereavement. By talking in this way, it may also help you get closure on issues that are unresolved and make moving forward easier in grief. Confronting difficult emotions that arise in grief is generally considered a healthy approach, and sometimes the most direct way to do this is by talking it out. Losing a loved one brings a deep sense of loneliness to most grievers, as they are left without their support person, their confidant, their best friend, and their continuous company. This can cause some people to unintentionally isolate themselves from others because they are feeling lost. So it can be vital to seek support from other people, bereavement agencies, counsellors, to help you work through grief in a healthy way. Most grievers do some version of talking to their dead loved ones, either in their thinking, in their head, or aloud. Because when a loved one dies, our relationship with them doesn't, and it is a way of maintaining the connection and the love going forward. Many tell me that they talk about just normal things that they used to, as they did in life together, making, as I've said, those decisions, talking things through, perhaps the pros and cons. Often we knew them so well that we can almost hear what they would say and know what they would answer and how they would react. So it can be a really effective way to help you make thoughtful decisions and resolve life's challenges, and therefore build your own confidence back up to live independently. A newly widowed lady that I support confided in a person at her church that she was talking to her dead husband, and she was told that she shouldn't be communicating with the dead. She was completely distraught when I saw her and left feeling like her lifeline of comfort had been ripped away from her. If you are a Christian, it does tell us in the Bible not to consult with mediums and conjure up dead spirits, and that's for our own protection. But that's an entirely different thing to what we're talking about here. The way we talk to our loved ones in grief is very different and should not bring any condemnation or judgment. After all, as a Christian myself, I pray and I do talk to an invisible God. So I'm very comfortable with that connection and a relationship in this way. This situation really reminded me that it's essential to take the time to listen more when a bereaved person confides in you about this, to ask them sensitive questions about what is really happening and not to jump to conclusions which will only heap more pain on them and perhaps drive them into isolation and guilt. Loneliness is one of the most underestimated feelings in grief, but research suggests that it can be lessened if you continue your connection by talking to your loved one in this way. Some people tell me that they still talk to a photograph of them. Initially, if you do that, you may feel overwhelmed with tears and grief. You may want to express your anger towards them, your shock. You may want to ask them all the questions that are unanswered, or just rant about what has happened. I did the empty chair exercise a long time after my mother died, And if you're not familiar with this, it's where you put an empty chair in front of you and you invite your dead loved one to sit down with you. And then you say aloud whatever comes into your mind. I was quite shocked and surprised that obviously the anger that I'd been bottling up just spilled out. And I said some things like, "I hate you, and why did you have to leave me?" As soon as I said that, I realised that even though that's how I perhaps felt in that moment, it wasn't the truth. But it felt so good to be able to release it. And as I did, I cried and I found myself saying, "Oh, sorry, Mum, I didn't mean that. I'm just angry with you that you've left. I'm sorry. I'm in a mess. I love you and I miss you." It was so cathartic and healing for me. That was 45 years ago, and I still remember the conversation with the empty chair and my mother. Having an awareness of that inner voice of your loved one can be deeply comforting, as it can feel like they are still there looking out for you and giving you internal strength. Often grieving people also tell me that they listen to answering machine messages, telephone messages, or watch videos of their loved one to hear their voice. A voice is deeply beautiful and a unique connection, bringing them alive to you in that moment. So if you do this, it's not weird. You're not tormenting yourself. You're not going crazy or living in the past. It's just a way of you wanting to feel close, to remember and to cherish them. As we know, there's no right or wrong way to grieve. However, people who do acknowledge and confront their painful emotions and feelings tend to move through grief and end up more emotionally resilient than those who avoid, ignore and repress their feelings following a loss. A person who talks to their loved one in their head or aloud does understand that their loved one is gone, and yet can still draw strength from this enduring relationship, and does find intrinsic value in a continuing connection and bond of love. Warden's 4 tasks of mourning is a model of grief that uses emotional tasks rather than stages to identify and assess a person's progression through grief. We can look at this in more detail in another video, but the 4th and final task says this. It says that the griever's job is to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on a new life. So today, as I dusted off the piano where our 2 elderly fathers' photos sit and my brother's photo sits, I said my usual hellos and I love yous and I miss you. And that's more than okay.